I'll never forget the first time I pulled up to the Collins Nocturnal Wildlife Preserve. My old sedan wheezed into the parking lot, engine knocking so hard I thought it might just die there and then, finishing me off before I could even start my new job. But that's the thing about luck. It's rarely kind enough to kill you when dying would actually solve your problems. I'd been out of work for weeks, dragging myself from one half-hearted interview to another, watching employers' faces fall the second they spotted my record. Every time the question, "Have you ever been convicted?" came up, my face would burn and I'd want to scream, "I'm innocent, you idiots. The real criminals got away and I took the fall." But that line never works in the real world. Nobody wants to hear it. So there I was, a 24-year-old ex-vet student with a criminal record I didn't deserve, my grandmother's memory hanging around my neck like a stone. She used to run this little wildlife rescue center, a bunch of sheds and cages that always smelled like hay and medicine. That place was my second home growing up. Then one day, it shut down under strange circumstances. Vague whispers about missing animals, weird shit happening at midnight, things nobody would explain to me. Collins Nocturnal Wildlife Preserve, the ad had read. Seeking caretaker for exotic creatures. Must not fear the dark. Good pay. I walked the gravel path as the sun died behind the trees. A single lamp buzzed overhead, lighting up a now hiring sign in half-dead neon. No guard at the gate. The only building I could see was this little structure with windows so dark they looked painted black. Hello? My voice just dropped dead in the air. Nothing but crickets chirping back at me. Just when I was starting to think I'd been lured to some fake job listing, a door swung open with a hiss. An old man with hunched shoulders just appeared. I mean, he didn't walk up. He just slid out from behind a wall without making a sound. His name tag said Larson, and his skin had this waxy look, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. He looked me up and down with cloudy eyes that said, "Great, another dead man walking." Then he handed me a stapled packet that smelled like it had been soaking in a basement. "Read this," he rasped, his voice like sandpaper. "You got the job. Orientation starts tonight." I just stared at him. "Wait, don't you want my references?" We don't bother with that here." His eyes narrowed, digging into me. "You're Smith, right? The one with the record? The one whose grandmother ran that little rescue that got shut down?" My blood went cold. "How did you—" "Mr. Collins has his ways." Larson cut me off like he was bored of the conversation before it even started. "He specifically requested we hire you when your application came in." "Mr. Collins? The owner? Why would he ask for me personally?" Larson's mouth twitched in what might have been a smirk. "Who knows why Mr. Collins does anything? Maybe he sees potential in you." His eyes narrowed further. "Or maybe he just wants to watch you break." Without another word, he turned and shuffled away, leaving me holding a handbook that felt damp and gross, like it had been soaking in something I didn't want to think about. Page 1. Strictly confidential. Staff use only. Page 2 had a list of rules, typed on what looked like an ancient typewriter, letters faded in spots. Rule 1. Feed the lantern baboon. Exactly at midnight, and never observe it eating. Rule 2. Incense for the ivory serpents must be lit, but don't let the smoke touch your skin. Rule 3. The avian gallery's windows must stay open, but only under the new moon. Rule 4. The hyena exhibit laughing, never laugh back. Rule 5. Flick the blood lanterns along feline row before dusk, never after. Rule 6. Heed the Collins chimes, ignore them at your peril. Rule 7. Never ask about the staff corridor marked ND. I let out a laugh that died the second it hit the air. The more I read, the more my stomach turned. The final page threatened. Violations can lead to punishment. Some are worse than death. Dramatic much? I muttered, but the joke fell flat even to my own ears. I remembered a story my grandmother told me once. She called it an old wives' tale about a traveling carnival that collected animals from places no one was meant to go. Creatures that weren't just animals, but something else. They wasted no time throwing me in the deep end. After Larson vanished, I wandered until I found what looked like a staff lounge, except it looked more like a fallout shelter than a break room. A thin woman with short black hair sat on a stool, pouring coffee into a thermos. Her name tag read Owens. She glanced up at me, one eyebrow raised. "You must be Smith. Or was it Serrano? Whatever. I'm Ms. Owens." She shoved the thermos at me. It was warm against my hands, the only warm thing in this cold place. "Drink. You'll need it." I took it, not sure what else to do. "Thanks." She jabbed a finger at the handbook in my hand. "So, you've seen the rules. Break them, you'll end up like Buddy." She pointed to the corner, where a metal cage held a caretaker uniform with nobody in it. At first, I thought it was empty, just clothes on a hanger. But looking closer, I saw this outline, like a shadow without a person to cast it. What happened to Buddy?" My mouth went dry as dust. "He broke Rule 1, she said, her voice dropping. "Feed the lantern baboon exactly at midnight and never observe it eating." He couldn't stop himself from looking. Her fingers tapped against her thermos like she was counting seconds. Next morning, the baboon was wearing his clothes, picking its teeth with his badge. Buddy was that. She waved at the empty shape in the cage. I stared at the uniform, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's not possible." "Really?" Her mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And what exactly do you think is possible in this world, Mr. Smith? People don't just disappear," I said, my voice catching. She leaned in close. Her breath smelled like burnt coffee. "In Collins's preserve, people don't disappear. They become something else." Is this some kind of sick joke? I tried to laugh, but it came out like a squeak. A sense of humor. That's rare around here. Her voice softened, just a touch. "Let me guess. You used to love animals, all starry-eyed and hopeful. You came here because you've got nowhere else to go." "Yeah, I have a record, but it's not my..." She held up her hand, shutting me up. "Your grandmother's wildlife rescue. The one that got shut down under mysterious circumstances. I've read your file." My jaw dropped. "How do you know about..." "Mr. Collins knows everything about everyone who works here," she said flatly. "He has a special interest in you, which means I have to keep you alive. At least for now." She picked up a radio that crackled with static, pressed a button. "Ready for the new hires orientation?" A scratchy voice replied, "Affirmative," sending him to the serpents first. Owens nodded. "Right. Smith, go meet David at the lower level, entrance to the ivory pit. Don't forget your protective mask." I almost choked on the coffee. "You mean Rule 2? Incense for the ivory serpents must be lit, but don't let the smoke touch your skin? This is real? The smoke can change you?" Owens just stared at me, her eyes hard. "Oh yes. Real as the coffee burning your tongue, dear." Then she turned away, leaving me standing there with questions stuck in my throat. I found the door to the ivory serpents behind a sign that said, "Restricted access. Keep out," in faded red letters. I was about to break that rule, ironically, because I was told to. A fat guy named David shuffled up, handing me a black mask with a filter that stank of rubber and chemicals. "You're the new blood?" He looked me over like I was a cut of meat. "Yes, sir," I answered, hating how shaky I sounded. "Drop the Zur," he grunted. "We don't do rank here. Just don't die." He waved me inside. The hallway reeked of bleach covering up something rotten, like someone had tried to hide a dead body with bathroom cleaner. At the end, a door opened onto this pit, a stone arena with a ledge you could look down from. I walked up to the edge, holding onto the cold stone. Below, white shapes moved like living ropes, snakes so pale you could see blood flowing through them. Some were thick as my leg, their white bodies gleaming in the dim light. David handed me some incense sticks. "Keep them lit. 1 stick every hour." He grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks. And like Rule 2 says, don't let the smoke touch your skin. My hands shook as I lit the first stick and stuck it in a holder by the ledge. Smoke curled up in these weird spirals. Right away, the snakes below started moving differently, their tongues flicking out like they were tasting the air. They slowed down, almost like they were getting high off the smell. The serpents stay calm with the incense, David said. Without it, they get nasty. He grabbed a long pole with a clamp, reached into a bin, and pulled out a live rabbit. The poor thing was shaking all over. My stomach twisted as David lowered it into the pit and let it go. "You new guys always look shocked," he said with a half smile. "Yeah, we feed them live. Don't start with the animal rights speech. This place doesn't exactly follow normal zoo rules." The snakes moved around the rabbit, wrapping around it. The rabbit let out one terrified squeal, then nothing. That was my first real taste of how fucked up this place was. I wanted to say something, to protest, but I swallowed it down. "You're thinking it," David said suddenly. "Thinking what?" I asked carefully. "That we're monsters," he replied, his voice softer than I expected. "That this is wrong. That maybe you should report us to somebody." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I thought the same thing my first week." "And now?" I asked. His eyes went distant. "Now I know that what's in that pit isn't just snakes. They're something else. Something that shouldn't exist but does. And keeping them calm is mercy, for them and for us." I swallowed hard. "What happens if the incense touches skin?" His face hardened, a muscle jumping in his jaw. "I'd rather not say. But we had a guy once, forgot his gloves. After a week, we found new scales in the pit, shaped exactly like a human face. I checked my mask was tight, suddenly paranoid about every breath. "You think I'm making this shit up?" he said. "No, But I couldn't finish. Because part of me really hoped, prayed. This was all just some sick initiation prank." He rolled up his sleeve, showing me a patch of white scales on his arm that caught the light like mother of pearl. 3 years ago, just one drop of smoke on my wrist. His voice went hollow. "It spreads, inch by inch. One day, I'll be more snake than man." I finished lighting the incense and wrote in a logbook. Incense number 1 lit at 10:15 p.m. The whole time, I felt the serpents watching me from below. "Come on," David said. "Let's get you to your next stop before you pass out." As we walked back through the corridors, I asked, "So, how many people work here at night?" David shrugged. "Less than you'd think. Most don't last long. Some vanish. Others." He stopped talking, his eyes darting to the shadows. "We do what we have to." We turned a corner and came across this huge door labeled specimen storage. It rattled like something inside was trying to get out. The metal bulged outward, then settled back. My heart jumped into my throat. "What's in there?" "Snakes that got too big for the main pit," he said quickly, walking faster. "Or ones that started eating each other. We keep them separate." "And what happens when they outgrow even the storage room?" I asked, not sure I wanted the answer. He stopped suddenly, turning to face me. His expression was dead serious. "Kid, there are questions you just don't ask here, for your own good." "I just want to understand what I'm getting into," I said. His face softened a little. "No, you don't. Trust me on that." He sighed. "I was new once too, thinking I could handle everything. Now I can't close my eyes without hearing them hiss in my dreams." That night, a small group of staff gathered under flickering lights. A skinny guy named Kenneth said, "So the new guy's done with the serpents. Good. Now show him the baboon." "Lantern baboon," another caretaker corrected him sharply. "Don't forget that name." Kenneth rolled his eyes. "Yeah, whatever. Kid, come with us." I followed them down a winding path with cages on all sides. Most were dark, but sometimes I caught glimpses of things. A deer-like creature with too many antlers, a bird with glowing green eyes, what might have been a leopard except for the reptile wings folded on its back. "I need to ask," I said quietly. "What is this place? Are these things real?" Kenneth gave me a side eye. Real enough when your buddy disappears into the hyena cage. Right, Lucia? He elbowed the woman next to him, who flinched like she'd been hit. She had tired eyes and worry lines all over her face. She nodded. Michael broke Rule 4. The hyena exhibit laughing. Never laugh back. It happened 2 months ago. The new guard laughed when they started making noises. The next morning we found him in the cage, giggling like crazy, his mouth stuck. Stuck? I repeated, not getting it. Her eyes met mine, and I saw a real fear there, frozen in a smile, like someone had taken fish hooks and pulled the corners of his mouth up to his ears. He hasn't stopped laughing since. Her voice broke. We keep him sedated now. It's all we can do. I felt sick. But hasn't anyone called the cops, or? Kenneth barked out a laugh that made me jump. And say what? Hello, police, we've got demon animals turning staff into freaks. Yeah, that'd go over great. Lucia grimaced. I tried once when I first started. The phone line always went dead. Then Mr. Collins rang the bell that night. I barely made it to the gate in time. I remembered Rule 6. Heed the Collins chimes. Ignore them at your peril. What happens if you don't go to the gate when the chimes ring? I asked. Kenneth and Lucia looked at each other. No one knows for sure, Kenneth said, because anyone who's ignored them has never been seen again. That can't be true, I said. Someone must have... Jade, Lucia cut in, her voice dropping to a whisper. She was helping me with the bird feeding schedule. Got too focused on a sick bird. The chimes rang 4 times. She never made it to the gate. Her voice cracked. We found her uniform the next day, folded up nice and neat outside Mr. Collins's office. Empty. They led me to a tall enclosure with barbed wire glinting in the moonlight. The sign said Lantern Baboon in big letters. Tiny cracks in the plastic made it look like someone had been punching it. Lucia set a bucket of raw meat at my feet. The smell hit me like a slap, copper and rot. All right, newbie, your turn at midnight. Remember Rule 1, feed the lantern baboon. Exactly at midnight, and never observe it eating. I swallowed. How do I know when it's done? Kenneth smirked, showing a chipped tooth. You'll hear bones breaking, but that doesn't mean you can look, unless you want to end up like Buddy, wearing the baboon's face. Is that what happened to Buddy? I asked, thinking about the empty uniform in the staff lounge. Buddy couldn't help himself, Lucia said quietly. He said he wanted to understand what made the creature tick. He looked for just a second. She shook her head. The baboon. It gets in your head. Makes you want to look. Midnight was 10 minutes away. The baboon enclosure was quiet, just occasional rustling in the tall grass. I couldn't see the creature anywhere. My hands were clammy. So I just wait here? Lucia nodded, her eyes darting around nervously. We'll watch from over there. Not too close, though. The baboon doesn't like an audience. That was it. They scattered, leaving me alone with a bucket of rotting meat. The stench made my stomach flip. All right, I muttered to myself. You've fed baby raccoons and orphaned possums. A glowing baboon can't be that much harder, right? The baboon let out this low croak from inside the enclosure like it was mocking me. The sound was too human, like someone pretending to be an animal. Are you in there? I whispered, peering into the darkness. Always, came a rasping voice from inside, a voice that sounded way too human. I jumped back. What the hell? Silence. Had I imagined it? The wind moved through the tall grass, but I didn't hear anything else. Nate, Lucia called from somewhere behind me. Don't talk to it. Just wait for midnight and do your job. I nodded, though she probably couldn't see me in the dark. My phone said 11:57, then 11:58. The seconds dragged by like hours. Every breath I took tasted like blood and rust, the bucket of meat stinking up the whole area. 11:59. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. 58:59. At exactly 12 o'clock, I grabbed a piece of meat, slimy between my fingers. I slid open a hatch at waist height with shaking hands. The smell that came out was even worse. sulfur and stagnant water. I tossed the meat in with a wet plop. The lantern baboon jumped into view so suddenly I almost screamed. It had these patches of glowing skin across its arms and chest, pulsing with this sick yellow-green light. Its face looked almost human, with eyes that were way too smart. It snatched the meat out of the air with hands that looked too much like mine, then froze, staring at me. "Don't watch me eat," it said in that human-like voice. "It's rude." I backed up fast, slamming the hatch shut. I turned around, pressing my back against the fence, determined not to look. Crunch. The baboon went to town on the meat, making wet, tearing sounds. Blood spattered the inside walls. I could hear it breathing through the food, making these horrible wet noises. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around to see what was happening. But I thought about Buddy, just an empty uniform filled with nothing. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. "Don't look. Don't fucking look." The crunching got louder, then suddenly stopped. My whole body tensed up. Silence. "You're different," the baboon whispered, its voice right behind my ear. "They always look. They can't help it." I kept staring straight ahead, focusing on a beat-up sign about zoonotic diseases on a nearby post. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job," it repeated like it thought that was funny. "Is that what you call this? Feeding monsters in the dark?" "You're not a monster," I said without thinking. "You're just different." The baboon made this soft noise, almost like a laugh. It sounded like a man trying not to giggle. "Oh, but I am a monster, Nathan Smith. And soon you'll be one too." My blood froze. "How do you know my name?" "I know everyone's name," it said. "I've worn many faces, tasted many souls." It moved away with a rustle of grass. I let out the breath I'd been holding, my heart trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I turned around slowly, but the enclosure was empty. Just tall grass swaying like something had just moved through it. Kenneth and Lucia came out of the shadows. Lucia handed me a beat-up notebook with dark stains on the cover. "Write down the time," she said flatly. "Did I do it right?" I asked as I wrote 12 a.m. Lantern baboon fed. Kenneth gave a short nod. "You're still human, so yeah." "It talked to me," I said, my voice shaking. It knew my name. Lucia and Kenneth exchanged looks. "It's trying to get in your head," Lucia said carefully. "Don't listen to anything it says." "But how did it know?" "It didn't," Kenneth cut me off. "It's guessing. Or it heard someone say your name. Don't give it power by believing it knows more than it does." But I could hear the doubt in his voice. By my 5th shift, I'd seen enough weird shit to fill a horror novel. But nothing prepared me for what I saw in the staff lounge around 3 a.m. that night. I'd come in looking for a break, only to find a caretaker named Donnie sitting alone in a corner, his shoulders shaking. He was giggling, this high-pitched sound that set my teeth on edge. At first I thought he was watching something funny on his phone. Then I realized how wrong it sounded, how forced and mechanical, like a toy with dying batteries. "Donnie?" I walked over carefully, my shoes squeaking on the floor. "You okay?" He turned slowly, and I saw his face. His grin stretched so wide it almost touched his ears. My stomach dropped to my feet. His eyes were bloodshot and staring at nothing. Drool ran from his mouth as the giggles kept coming, like gravel in a tin can. I stumbled back, almost tripping over a mop bucket. "Jesus!" "Don't bother with him," came Owens's voice from behind me. "He broke Rule 4. The hyena exhibit laughing? Never laugh back." "Too bad." I spun around. "Can't we help him? This isn't right." "Help him?" She raised an eyebrow. "How exactly?" "I don't know. Medicine, therapy, something." My voice was getting louder. "You think we haven't tried?" Her voice got sharp. "What do you do with someone whose face muscles have been permanently changed by whatever those hyenas did to him? What doctor would even believe this?" "Then why keep him here?" I demanded. "Why not at least let him go home?" Owens just stared at me. "Because out there he'd be a lab rat, or locked up in some psych ward, or killed because people would be afraid." She pointed at Donnie. Here, at least he has people who know what happened to him. No, but can't help, I said bitterly. Welcome to Collins's, she said simply. I looked at Donnie's endless grin, the corners of his mouth pulled so tight that the skin was cracking. Blood seeped from the tears. The giggling never stopped, like a broken record. He just stared through me, laughing and laughing. I got the hell out of there, fighting the urge to throw up. My grandmother used to say, "Compassion for all creatures, Nathan." But how do you show compassion in a place where the staff are turning into monsters right in front of you? I leaned against the wall outside, trying to catch my breath. A hand touched my shoulder, making me jump. It was a caretaker I hadn't met before, a guy with glasses and a neat beard. First time seeing Donnie, he asked, looking sympathetic. I nodded, not able to find words. I'm Dr. Mercer, he said. I was a vet before. This place. He waved his hand at our surroundings. Now I do what I can for both the creatures and the staff. Can't you help him? I asked, desperate. Dr. Mercer's eyes filled with sadness. I've tried everything I know. The best I can do is keep him comfortable. He paused, like he was choosing his words. Whatever these things do to us, it's beyond normal medicine. It's like they rewrite who we are at a basic level. Things, I repeated. Not animals. They're not animals, he said quietly. Not in any way we understand. There's something older, something that shouldn't be here but is. Then why keep them here? I demanded. Why not destroy them? Dr. Mercer looked at me for a long time. 2 reasons. First, I'm not sure they can be destroyed. Not for good. And second, he lowered his voice. Mr. Collins doesn't want them destroyed. They're his collection. Before I could ask more questions, a bell chimed faintly from somewhere above us. Dr. Mercer stiffened. You should go. That's the warning before the main chimes. You don't want to be late to the gate. As he hurried away, I called after him. Wait, what about Donnie? I'll sedate him, he replied without looking back. It's all I can do. A few days later, I sat in the break room with a small group of caretakers. We rarely ate together. Most people were too paranoid to hang around others in case someone had broken a rule. But it was my dinner break, so I choked down a microwaved burrito that tasted like cardboard, trying to ignore the nasty smell coming from behind the vending machine. Larson, the old guy who'd given me that soggy handbook, came in, poured himself coffee in a mug that said "World's Okayest Employee," and stared at me. So, how's the job so far, Smith? I tried to sound casual. Oh, great. Just regular zoo stuff. Burning incense, demon baboons, possessed hyenas. The usual. To my surprise, he let out a wheezing laugh that turned into a wet cough. Dark humor, huh? That's the spirit. Another caretaker, Rosalind, spoke up. She was maybe mid-30s with faded blonde hair and a messy bun. Sometimes joking is the only way to stay sane. If you can laugh, just not near the hyenas, you might survive. She kept fidgeting with a ring on her finger, her eyes scanning the room like she expected something to jump out from the shadows. I swallowed a chunk of burrito that tasted like wet clay. Anyone want to tell me how Mr. Collins keeps this place secret? I mean, there must be tourists or something. They do tours, but only on special nights, Rosalind said, dropping her voice. We show the visitors only the safe exhibits, make it look normal. The real horrors stay hidden. If any visitor stumbles into something they shouldn't. She trailed off, looking at Larson. He finished her thought, setting his coffee down with a thunk. They don't go home. We take care of their disappearance. The burrito stuck in my throat. So this place just eats curious visitors? I whispered, horrified. And we're all just okay with that? Okay with it? Rosalind let out a bitter laugh. None of us are okay with any of this. But what choice do we have? We could go to the authorities, I suggested. Tried that, Larson said flatly. 3 times. First time, the cop I talked to disappeared. His badge showed up in the hyena pit a week later. Second time, the reporter I contacted ended up taking a job here. Last I saw her, she was half bird. Third time. He trailed off, looking haunted. What happened the third time? I pressed. The third time, Mr. Collins knew before I even made the call. The chimes rang. When I got to the gate, he was waiting. Larson's hand shook slightly as he lifted his coffee. He gave me a choice. Stay quiet or join his special collection. I chose to stay. My appetite died. I pushed away my half-eaten burrito. So we're all just trapped here? Forever? Not everyone, Rosalind said quietly. Some get out. How? I asked, leaning forward. They die, Larson said bluntly. Or they become something else. Either way, they're gone. I left them there, their quiet desperation sticking to me like cobwebs. On my way out, Rosalind caught my arm, making sure Larson wasn't looking. Hey, she whispered, pressing a folded piece of paper into my hand. Be careful. I stuck the note in my pocket, waiting until I was alone to read it. When I finally unfolded it in the staff bathroom, it said, They're always listening. If you want to live, keep your head down and trust no one. But if you find a chance to run, take it. Did Rosalind know something? Had she somehow figured out I was already thinking about escape? Or was she just warning me that this place was full of traitors? I flushed the note. Paranoia gnawed at me. But maybe she was right. In this place, the walls themselves felt alive, and you never knew who or what might be listening in. As I left the bathroom, I almost walked right into Dr. Mercer again. He steadied me with a hand on my shoulder. Careful there, Smith. You look like you've seen a ghost. Just tired, I lied, not meeting his eyes. He studied my face like he was looking for symptoms. Maybe you should let me check you out. Some of the effects of this place can sneak up on you. What do you mean? I asked, suddenly worried. He lowered his voice. The preserve changes people, even those who follow the rules. Just being around these things can have side effects. Like what? My heart started racing. Bad dreams. Paranoia. Seeing things. He ticked them off like he was reading a list. Sometimes physical stuff too. Rashes, sensitivity to light, changes in appetite. I thought about my snake dreams, the constant feeling of being watched. Is there a cure? Distance, he said simply. The further you get from Collins's, the less it affects you. But he glanced around, then slipped a small vial of clear liquid into my hand. 2 drops under your tongue before bed. It helps with the dreams, at least. Before I could thank him, he was gone, walking quickly down the hallway. I put the vial in my pocket, weirdly touched by this small act of kindness in a place that seemed designed to kill any human feeling. A week or so later, I was assigned to do a maintenance check on the West Wing. My job was simple. Refill feed troughs, check that gates were locked. But somewhere in the maze-like hallways, I got lost. Easy to do in a place that seemed to rearrange itself at night. I turned a corner and saw a metal door with a faded sign, ND Corridor, staff only. The door was thick with a rusty padlock. There was this weird silence coming from beyond it, like the quiet after someone screams. I remembered Rule 7. Never ask about the staff corridor marked ND. Don't mention it. Don't try to enter. Should probably just keep walking, I muttered to myself, already backing up. But then I heard something from inside. A muffled whimper, like a child or small animal in pain. My chest tightened. Just go. This isn't your problem, my brain insisted. But my grandmother's voice whispered in my head. Compassion over fear, Nathan. I pressed my ear against the door, the metal cold against my skin. Another soft moan came through, sounding human. My stomach lurched. Could it be a caretaker trapped in there? Or something worse? Hello? I called softly, my heart racing. Suddenly footsteps pounded from inside. I jumped back as the door rattled, the padlock jingling. A voice hissed. Who's there? Let me out. I almost yelped, stumbling backward. Then, from the far end of the corridor, a flashlight beam swept across the hall, blinding me for a second. I turned to see Mrs. Owens approaching, looking pissed. She barked, "Step away, Smith. Didn't you read the rules? Rule 7. Never ask about the staff corridor marked ND. I stammered. I heard. Don't break that rule, she said, her voice deadly serious. Not if you want to stay human. There's someone in there, I insisted, standing my ground. They need help. What makes you think it's a someone and not a something? That threw me off. It sounded human. So does the baboon when it wants to, she shot back. So do the hyenas when they're hunting. So do the birds when they copy voices. But what if it is a person? I pressed. What if they're hurt? Owen stepped closer, her face inches from mine. Let me explain something to you, Smith. The ND corridor is where we keep the mistakes. The ones too far gone to work but not monstrous enough to display. The ones caught between human and other. Trust me when I say you do not want to open that door. You're keeping people locked up? I was horrified. That's illegal. It's wrong. Wrong, she repeated with a bitter laugh. That's exactly the point. They're not fully human anymore. The door rattled again, harder this time. A voice, definitely human, called out, Please, I can hear you. I'm still me. Owens didn't even flinch. That's what they all say, right before they try to eat your face. She glared at me, her flashlight pointed at my face, making me squint. You heard nothing. This corridor is off limits. That door stays locked at all times, or do you want to end up like Donnie? The memory of Donnie's endless giggling came back to me, that horrible stretched grin. My stomach turned. Got it, I muttered, stepping back. Owens grabbed my arm, her grip like iron. You breathe one word about this and you'll regret it. She marched me away, leaving behind that door and whoever or whatever was calling from inside. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept spinning with theories about the ND corridor. Were they holding caretakers who'd broken rules? Or actual creatures that needed special handling? The voice had sounded so human, so desperate. Could I really just ignore it? I tossed and turned, the voice from behind the door haunting me. Please, I'm still me. What did that mean? How much of me was left after the preserve got done with you? I thought about Dr. Mercer's vial, still untouched in my pocket. Maybe it would help with the nightmares, but could it quiet the guilt eating away at me? I doubted it. While I tried to figure out what to do next, the preserve kept throwing its regular brand of horror at me. I got assigned to watch the hyena exhibit. If they laugh, keep quiet, was all the instruction I got. Rule 4, the hyena exhibit. Laughing, never laugh back. One evening, I stood by the enclosure when the hyenas started their cackling. Soft at first, like a bunch of drunk uncles at a barbecue. Then it got louder, the sound twisting into something that sounded weirdly human. I kept my face blank, but God, it was funny in a sick kind of way. I felt the corners of my mouth trying to turn up. My chest hurt from holding in a laugh. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. I kept seeing Donnie's face, that permanent grin. I locked my jaw shut tight. The hyenas seemed to sense me fighting it. They pressed against the fence, heads tilted, cackling in waves. Their eyes were too smart, watching for any reaction. The sound vibrated in my head, like they were attacking my brain directly. Then one of them spoke. In a voice that sounded like my grandmother's, it said, Nathan. Oh, Nathan, dear. Remember how you failed me? I stiffened, digging my nails into my palms hard enough to draw blood. Shut up, I whispered, my chest aching. The second hyena giggled, adding, You let her rescue center die. You're worthless. Rage and grief hit me like a truck. I almost snapped back at it, but I remembered the rule. Don't make a sound. So I clamped my mouth shut, tears burning in my eyes. They cackled louder, mocking me with my grandmother's voice. She died disappointed in you, one said, getting her voice exactly right. Another wave of almost laughter bubbled up in my throat, a weird mix of anger and sadness trying to get out. If I let it escape, I knew I was done for. "You promised to carry on my work," the hyena said in my grandmother's voice, every word perfect. "But you ended up with a criminal record instead. What a disappointment." How could it know that? Those were almost exactly the words my grandmother had said from her hospital bed before. "Stop it," I hissed, blinking back tears. "You didn't know her." The hyena's eyes gleamed like it had won something. "But I do know her, Nathan, because part of her is in here with us." It tapped its chest with a paw. "Collins collects memories too, you see, not just bodies." With everything I had, I stayed silent, backing away from the enclosure. The hyenas eventually quieted down, their eyes watching me like they'd almost caught me. And they had. They'd nearly reeled me in like a fish on a hook. I survived. Barely. But their words echoed in my head for hours. Even after the cackling died down, I noticed one hyena still hanging by the fence. It just stared at me, making this low rumbling sound, somewhere between a growl and a purr. My grandmother's voice, copied so perfectly just moments before, wouldn't leave my head. The memory of her last days in the hospital haunted me. How I'd promised to continue her work, but ended up with a criminal record instead. Maybe the hyenas can smell guilt, I thought. Maybe guilt is like blood in the water to them. I forced myself to walk away, each step feeling like I was dragging lead weights. Around my 10th shift, the nightmares got worse. Every night I saw the ND corridor, a shape inside calling my name. "Nathan Smith," it hissed. "Why are you waiting?" Even during the day, when I passed that part of the preserve, I'd hear whispers, "Help me. Free me." The voice sounding more and more like my grandmother with each passing night. One morning as I was leaving, I found a slip of paper in my locker. Midnight. ND corridor. The door might be unlocked. No signature. The handwriting was cramped and spidery. My heart raced. Was this a trap? Or was someone giving me a chance to help whoever was in there? I thought about the risks. Breaking that rule was basically suicide. But if it was a chance to do something good, I decided to be careful, gather more information first. If everything went to hell like I thought it might be safer to slip in during the chaos. I caught Harper, one of the few staff who seemed halfway decent, and asked if she knew anything about the note. She wouldn't look at me, fidgeting with her radio. "I don't know who wrote it," she said, "but you need to watch your back. If Collins or Owens thinks you're snooping where you shouldn't." She didn't finish, but I got the message. There are worse things than getting fired around here. "Harper," I said quietly, "what do you know about my grandmother?" "Elena Smith?" Her eyes went wide. "Where did you hear that name?" "She was my grandmother," I said carefully. "And apparently, Collins tried to acquire her once." Harper looked around nervously, then pulled me into a supply closet, shutting the door. "Listen to me," she whispered urgently. "Your grandmother was one of the few who ever escaped Collins's collection. She knew things about the preserve, about Collins himself, things that could have exposed him." "What things?" I pressed. "I don't know exactly," she admitted. "But there are rumors that she discovered Collins's true nature, that she found proof he wasn't human, hasn't been for centuries." A chill ran down my spine. That's crazy. In this place?" She gave a bitter laugh. "Everything's crazy. Look, all I know is that after your grandmother escaped, Collins became obsessed with finding her. When she died of natural causes, he was furious. And now you're here. You think he wants revenge?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe he thinks whatever made her special might run in the family." That same night, a caretaker named Foster screwed up big time in the ivory pit. He came in late, forgot his mask in the rush, and lit the incense with his face exposed. By morning, people were saying his arms had started growing white scales that shined in the light. Then he vanished. I saw blood near the serpent pit stairs, and a single boot, the leather half melted. Staff whispered that he was now one of them. My nerves were shot. How many more people would disappear or change before someone stopped this madness? When I walked by the pit later, I heard a faint moan from the darkness below, followed by a hissing laugh. Part of me wanted to look down to see if Foster was there among the serpents, but I was too scared. I hurried on, trying not to imagine a half-human, half-serpent caretaker slithering around down there. David found me later, looking grim. "You heard about Foster?" I nodded. "He forgot his mask, right? Broke Rule 2. Incense for the ivory serpents must be lit, but don't let the smoke touch your skin." "It wasn't that simple," David said quietly. "I was with him. He didn't just forget his mask. He took it off on purpose." "What? Why would anyone do that?" David's eyes were haunted. He said he was tired of fighting it. Said the dreams had gotten so bad, he could feel scales growing under his skin even when he was awake. Said maybe if he just gave in, the nightmare would end. I swallowed hard. "So he wanted to transform?" "Some do," David admitted. "When the preserve gets in your head, sometimes becoming one of the monsters seems easier than fighting them." He looked at me hard. "Have you been having dreams, Smith? Visions? Voices calling to you?" I hesitated, not sure if I should admit to my nightmares. "Sometimes," I said carefully. "Why?" "Because it means the preserve is working on you," he said grimly. "And once that starts, it rarely stops." On the night of the next new moon, I had a plan. The avian gallery would be in full swing, staff would be spread thin, and Collins's chime was known to ring at random times. Chaos was pretty much guaranteed. I hid a small crowbar under my jacket, the metal cold against my skin. I was determined to check out the ND corridor if a big enough distraction happened. Maybe I could free whoever was inside, or at least find out what was really going on. As if reading my mind, the preserve started falling apart earlier than I expected. It started with the lantern baboon missing at midnight. Another caretaker was supposed to feed it, but the baboon never showed. The caretaker left the meat anyway, then found footprints leading away from the cage. The glow in the enclosure was completely gone. Next, the hyenas started cackling around 11:50 p.m., way too early. They sounded almost angry, like they knew something was wrong. Two caretakers were trying not to laugh back, their faces twisting with the effort, and the avian gallery windows needed to open at 12 a.m. But the caretaker who was supposed to help me was stuck dealing with a serpent problem. Everything was happening at once, like a perfect storm. As I ran from one part of the preserve to another, I heard screams coming through the staff radios mixed with static. "The serpents are going crazy, can't keep them down," someone shouted. Another voice was screaming about the feline rose red lanterns failing again. It was like every creature in the place could feel something in the air. Meanwhile, the lights kept flickering on and off. Some hallways went completely dark. I heard a scream from far away. Someone who didn't have a flashlight. My chest felt tight. This is it, I thought, half scared, half excited. This might be the meltdown that lets me get into ND. In all the confusion, a new caretaker accidentally locked the avian gallery windows an hour too early, ignoring the schedule. The birds started shrieking, human voices echoing up and down the corridor, calling out names. "Nate! Nate! Nate!" I froze, a weird mix of horror and grief washing over me as I heard my name coming from those twisted beaks, the sound cutting through me like a knife. The caretaker realized his mistake and scrambled to open the windows, but the damage was done. One staff member who heard his name from a parrot thing with his mother's voice just collapsed, foaming at the mouth and babbling nonsense. "They're in my head," he moaned, holding his temples. "Make them stop. Make them stop. Get him out of here," I yelled to another caretaker. "The longer he listens, the worse it'll get." The glass started to warp. I saw a caretaker's reflection merging with the enclosure's glass, like his face was melting into it. He screamed, pounding on the glass as the bird shrieked louder, his features stretching and distorting. "Help me," he screamed, his voice muffled as his mouth started to sink into the glass. "It's pulling me in." I grabbed him, pulling with all my strength. "Hold on, don't let go." The glass rippled like water, trying to suck him in. By some miracle, Or maybe because staff finally got the windows open again, the shrieking stopped. He fell free, but half his face was shiny like glass, one eye flat and painted looking. I'd never seen such pure terror on anyone's face. He touched his face, feeling the smooth parts where skin should be, and let out a whimper that I'll never forget. "What's happening to me?" he whispered, his voice sounding like it was coming through a bottle. "I don't know," I admitted, helping him to his feet. "But we'll get you to Dr. Mercer. He'll know what to do." "There's no fixing this," the man said, a tear running down his half-glass cheek. "I'm becoming part of the exhibit, aren't I?" I couldn't answer him. The truth was, I had no idea what happened to staff who were partly transformed. Did they recover? Were they locked up in the ND corridor? Or were they disposed of when they became too inhuman? I helped the caretaker to a safe spot against the wall, squeezing his shoulder. He stared back at me with his one normal eye, the other just glass. "Hurts," he mouthed, no sound coming out. I had no words of comfort. My hands were shaking, adrenaline pumping through me. How many rules are being broken tonight? The dam had finally broken, and all the horrors of the preserve. As if things weren't bad enough, the power started going out. One by one, the floodlights dimmed. The preserve fell into darkness where shadows seemed to move on their own. Then came one chime from Mr. Collins's bell. I heard staff gasp all around me. We weren't at the gate, none of us were, and we were in the middle of a crisis. 2 chimes. My skin crawled. That meant we had to get to the gates, or face whatever happened to Jade. 3 chimes rang out, clearer than the first 2. If we didn't move now, we'd be picked out. The staff stampeded for the gate. Everyone ran, leaving jobs half done. My heart was racing. This was the meltdown I'd been waiting for, perfect for slipping away. But it felt insane to ignore the chimes. "Nate!" Evelyn grabbed my arm, her pink hair wild in the emergency lights. "Where are you going? The gates are that way." "I can't," I said, pulling away. This might be my only chance. Chance for what? Her eyes went wide as she realized. "The ND corridor? Are you crazy?" Rule 7. Never ask about the staff corridor marked ND. You'll be worse than dead. "Don't go to the gate." Mira suddenly appeared beside us, her voice urgent. "Remember what I told you. This is your opening, Nate." "You're encouraging this?" Evelyn gasped. "Mira, that's 4 chimes." Mira cut her off as another bell sound echoed through the air. "Someone's already doomed. Better make it count." 4 chimes. My stomach twisted. That sealed it. Someone was definitely going to vanish tonight. But I had my crowbar and a crazy sense of purpose. Now or never. "Nate, please," Evelyn begged, tears in her eyes. "Don't do this." "I have to," I whispered. "For my grandmother. For everyone locked in that corridor." I could almost hear my grandmother's voice. "Save them, Nathan. Don't let fear control you." But the memory of Jade, swallowed by that blank-faced thing, made me want to run. My whole body shook with indecision. Gate or ND corridor? The 5th chime rang in the distance, hollow and final. They'll notice I'm gone. They'll come for me. But the ND corridor door, that beat-up metal portal, kept calling to me. My chance to find who or what was trapped inside. "Go," Mira urged, pushing me toward the corridor. "I'll create a distraction." "What kind of distraction?" I asked. Her smile was sad. The kind only someone already half-changed can make. She rolled up her sleeve, showing me that her arm now glowed with the same light as the lantern baboon. "Turns out I'm more useful as bait than a caretaker these days. Now go." God help me, I thought, and made my choice. I veered off the main path, letting the staff rush past. My whole body buzzed with adrenaline, my fingers tingling. The chimes continued faintly in the distance. 5, 6, more than I'd ever heard before. I found the ND corridor. The door was locked, but the padlock looked rusted. I jammed the crowbar in, leveraged with all my might, praying no staff would find me. With an awful screech of metal, The lock snapped. I crept inside, my heart in my throat. A short hallway lined with steel doors stretched before me, each door with a small barred window. The smell hit me, antiseptic barely covering rot. I heard low moans, shuffling, the scrape of something against metal. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. "Another visitor?" came a raspy whisper from the nearest cell. "You must be desperate to break Rule 7. Never ask about the staff corridor marked ND." I peeked through the bars, my heart racing. Inside was a caretaker half-changed, a hybrid of man and serpent, patches of white scales across his arms. Probably the caretaker who lost his mask in the ivory pit. He stared at me with watery eyes, his pupils vertical slits. "Foster," I whispered, recognizing what was left of his face. "Not anymore," he hissed, his tongue flicking between lips that weren't quite human anymore. But enough of me left to know the name. "I'm going to get you out," I promised, tugging at the cell door. "Why?" he asked, confusion in his snake eyes. "So I can scare the shit out of the world outside? So scientists can cut me open? I'm not human enough for freedom anymore, kid. Help me," another voice called weakly from the next cell. I moved to it, finding a person with bird features, feathers growing along her cheeks. Another caretaker halfway through changing. She reached for me weakly, fingers ending in talons. "Please," she whispered. "I haven't gone too far yet. I can still think, still feel. My name is Miranda. I worked the avian gallery. One night I looked into a bird's eyes when it sang. Been growing feathers ever since. They were keeping chained staff here, hidden from the rest of the preserve. A human zoo inside the monster zoo. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Nathan Smith," I answered automatically. Her eyes widened. "Smith? Like Elena Smith?" My heart skipped. "She was my grandmother. Did you know her?" "Not directly," Miranda said, her voice getting more bird-like with excitement. "But she's a legend here. The one who got away. The one who almost exposed Collins." "Exposed him as what?" I pressed. "As one of them," Foster hissed from his cell. "A creature pretending to be human, collecting others like himself and turning humans into monsters for fun." A third cell caught my attention. Watery giggling came from inside. My blood ran cold. Donnie. He was strapped to a table, mouth frozen in that grin. Up close, I could see his mouth had literally fused into a permanent smile, teeth always showing. He cackled, eyes rolling, drool running down his chin. "Broke Rule 4, he managed to say between giggles. The hyena exhibit laughing? Never laughed back. Couldn't help it. So funny. Everything's so funny now. Tears burned my eyes. This was beyond horrifying. But I had no illusions about busting them all out. If I opened all the cells, they might be so far gone that letting them loose would put everyone in danger. Still, I couldn't just leave them like this. I looked around, found a ring of keys on a desk. My hands shook. What do I do? "Let me out first," Miranda pleaded. "I'm the most human. I can help you free the others who aren't too far gone." "Don't trust her," Foster warned. "Bird minds are tricksters. She'll fly off and leave you." "That's not true," Miranda protested, her voice rising to a bird-like screech before she got control again. "I just want to go home." Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, crowbar raised. Ms. Owens stood there with 2 security guys in black uniforms. Her eyes blazed with fury. "You idiot," she spat. "You've doomed yourself and them." My heart hammered so hard it hurt. "They're caretakers. You can't keep them locked up like animals." She raised an eyebrow. "Should we let them wander around, half-changed, spreading whatever this is?" I shook my head, close to tears. "This is insane. Maybe we can help them." "I've tried," she snapped, and for the first time I saw real pain beneath her cold exterior. "I've spent years looking for a cure, a reversal, anything. There is nothing that can undo what the preserve does once it takes hold." "So you just lock them up and forget about them?" I demanded. "No," she said quietly. "I keep them alive. I keep them comfortable. I keep them from being cut open in some government lab or hunted down by scared mobs. This is the only mercy I can offer. The 2 guards came at me. One pinned my arms, twisting me around, while I kicked uselessly. "Let go." Owens pointed at the cells. "Take him to the deep one, unless Mr. Collins wants him for something else." Panic shot through me, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. My crowbar clattered to the floor. I fought like a wild animal. "No, please." That's when the whole building shook, like something massive had slammed into it. The lights flickered, bulbs popping in showers of glass. A roar echoed from the corridor, making the walls vibrate. The security guys hesitated. Owens's face tightened. What now? A caretaker burst into the ND corridor, panting, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "Ms. Owens, the baboon just tore open the reptile wing. Let the serpents out. He froze, seeing me pinned. "Mira," Owens whispered, the color draining from her face. "She's done something to the baboon. They're working together." "Mira?" I asked, confused. "How could she?" "Because she's been partly merged with it for years," Owens said grimly. "Fighting the change, but slowly losing. And now she's embraced it." Owens cursed, shoving the bloody caretaker aside. "Stay here. Watch him. I'll deal with the serpents." She rushed off with 1 guard. That left me with 1 guard, a big guy glancing nervously at the ceiling as it groaned. Distant roars and shrieks filtered in. Another meltdown. Bigger meltdown. I caught the guard's eyes, trying a different approach. "Please," I said, my voice shaking. "Look around you. This place is a nightmare. We can't keep enabling it." He snorted. "What am I supposed to do about it?" "Help me free them," I urged. "At least the ones who are still mostly human." "And then what?" he demanded. "Where do they go? How do they live? You think the world outside is ready for people like this?" Before I could answer, the building rocked again. A chunk of ceiling fell, missing us by inches. The guard swore, stepping back in alarm. I seized the moment, slamming my foot into his knee. He went down with a groan and I wrenched free, grabbing the ring of keys from the desk. "You'll regret this," he gasped, holding his injured knee. I ran down the corridor, fumbling to unlock at least 1 cell. Maybe I could save 1 caretaker who wasn't completely gone. The serpent man? Or the bird lady? The serpent caretaker hissed at me, eyes glazed. The bird lady whimpered, "Release me. I can still speak. They haven't turned me fully." I swallowed hard, stuck the key in her cell door. It opened with a click. She stumbled out, feathers sprouting from her arms, but her eyes were still clear. "Thank you," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "You don't know what this means." "Go," I urged. "We'll find a way out." Meanwhile, the guard got up, grabbing his baton. "Stop!" The bird lady let out a shriek, more bird than human. She slashed at the guard with her claws, catching him across the cheek. He stumbled back, giving us a second. I yanked her away, running for the exit. We emerged into a hallway filled with smoke. Incense? No, some other kind of chemical haze, possibly from a broken container. It stung my eyes and burned my lungs. Which way? I coughed, completely lost in the fog. "The staff lounge leads outside," she gasped, her voice getting more bird-like by the second. "Hurry, I can feel the change speeding up. Stress makes it worse." The building shook again. We passed a window that showed the preserve yard. Ivory serpents were slithering across the paths, some carrying bits of staff uniforms. I fought back vomit at the gore, an arm here, what looked like part of a leg there. The lantern baboon sat on top of a lamppost, chest glowing a sick orange. "Is that Mira?" I asked, pointing to the baboon. Miranda squinted. "Maybe. Or maybe Mira is gone, and that's just the baboon wearing her memories now." Hyena's laughs echoed through the air, and I caught a glimpse of them chasing a caretaker who was already half laughing, his mouth stretching too wide. Full meltdown didn't begin to describe it. This was apocalypse in miniature. Amid the chaos, I looked up at the tower. The silhouette was still there, but something had changed. The window glowed with an eerie light, flickering like it was on fire, or filled with swirling darkness. Mr. Collins, I realized, might be losing control of his own creation. "He's angry," Miranda whispered, following my gaze. "I can feel it. The whole preserve can feel it." "What is he?" I asked. "Really?" "Something old," she replied, her voice thin with fear. "Something that was collecting strange creatures long before this preserve existed. Something that sees humanity as just another exhibit in his zoo." We made our way through hallways of chaos. A caretaker saw us, recognized Miranda, and screamed, You're changing." "I've been changing for months, Mike," she snapped back. "And I'm still more human than whatever's happening to you." The man, Mike, looked down at his hands, which were starting to glow with that same light from the baboon. "Oh God," he moaned. "I touched the slime. I didn't think." "It's too late," Miranda said, not unkindly. "The baboon has marked you. You should run while you still have your mind." Mike stared at her, tears in his eyes. Where? Where can any of us go now? I felt sick for him. For all of them. Miranda whimpered, sounding scared. "Don't leave me." I guided her forward, arm around her shoulders. "We'll find a safe way out." But was there a safe way? The front gate was probably swarmed with staff called by the chimes. Then again, he'd rung so many times, maybe that whole system was out the window. We reached the staff lounge. The place reeked of blood, sharp and metallic. Several staff lay on the floor, either knocked out or dead, I couldn't tell. One woman's eyes stared at the ceiling, seeing nothing. Over in the corner, Donnie was sprawled out, eyes wide, grin fixed. Whether he was alive or not, I had no idea. "Donnie," Miranda whispered, grief in her voice. "We were friends before. Before he broke Rule 4, the hyena exhibit laughing." "Never laughed back," I said for her. She nodded, a tear running down her cheek. "He thought he could beat them, that his will was stronger. He was wrong." A fresh wave of fear washed over me. This place was a graveyard. A huge crash shook the lounge. The ceiling groaned. A chunk of debris fell, nearly crushing us. Dust filled the air. "Come on," I shouted, pulling the bird lady forward. We ducked into a side corridor, looking for a back exit. The overhead lights kept flickering, casting crazy shadows that seemed to reach for us. Suddenly, I almost ran into Mrs. Owens, who was limping and covered in soot. She pointed a tranquilizer gun at me. "Stop right there." I tensed up. "Get out of my way." Her eyes darted to the half-bird caretaker. "So you let one out. That's your choice, Smith? Doom us all?" I spread my arms. "Doom? It's already doomed. Look around." She let out a bitter laugh, raising the gun. "True. But Mr. Collins might salvage things if we get control back." "Control?" Miranda screeched, sounding less human by the minute. "Is that what you call this? Torture? Imprisonment?" "I call it the best we can do," Owen shot back. "You think I like this? Watching people I've worked with for years turn into things? Locking them away? Wondering if I'll be next?" The bird lady cowered behind me. I took a shaky step forward. "Owens, please. We can't fix this by hurting each other. Let us go, or help us." Her expression wavered. For a second, I saw something human in those hard eyes. I've spent 20 years trying to help, looking for cures, studying the changes. Nothing works. "So you just gave up?" I challenged. "No," she said quietly. "I contained. I managed. I kept the horrors at bay. Until you came along with your heroics and broke Rule 7. Never ask about the staff corridor marked ND. I had to know," I insisted. "And now you do," she replied bitterly. "Congratulations. Your curiosity might have doomed us all." Then something in her eyes hardened. "No, Collins doesn't forgive." She squeezed the trigger. I ducked, but it was the bird lady who cried out. The dart stuck in her arm. She staggered, letting out a half-human, half-bird shriek, then collapsed at my feet. "No!" I roared, rage taking over. I lunged at Owens, tackling her. The tranq gun skittered across the floor. We grappled. She elbowed my ribs, I slammed her shoulder. Despite her limp, she fought like a tiger, her nails raking my face. "You don't understand," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Collins will destroy everything if his collection escapes. The world isn't ready for these creatures." "Then why work for him?" I demanded, pinning her arms. "Why help him do this?" "Because I made a deal," she spat. "My sister was the first, changed by the hyenas. I agreed to work for Collins if he'd keep her alive, give her a decent place to exist, even in her changed state." That stopped me cold. "Your sister is in the ND corridor," she finished. "Has been for 15 years. And I've kept my end of the bargain." Then the building quaked again, boards splintering overhead. A roar so loud it rattled my teeth erupted from the hallway. Maybe a serpent-lion hybrid or God knows what. Owens hissed. "You have no idea what you've unleashed, Smith." I shot back. "This place was never stable to begin with." She shoved me off, grabbed the gun, aimed at me. My adrenaline spiked, time seeming to slow down. Then an incredibly loud shriek tore through the corridor. The avian gallery again? Or something new? Owens winced, distracted for a second. I seized the chance, kicking the gun from her hand. It fired harmlessly into the wall. She screamed curses at me as I ran. I felt sick leaving the bird lady behind. She lay there, the tranquilizer working through her system, half conscious. When her eyes flickered open for a moment, I thought I saw tears, human tears, welling up. I whispered, "I'm sorry," but the roar in the hallway drowned out my words. The corridors flickered with emergency lights. I stumbled through swirling dust, half blind. All I wanted was to find an exit and survive. But the preserve had other plans. The baboon, serpents, and countless horrors roamed freely. The staff were scattered, some half-changed, some frozen in terror. A caretaker collapsed in front of me, his eyes glowing faintly, like dying coals. He mumbled something about the cats. They see me. Then convulsed, his back arching unnaturally. I was shaking all over, pumped full of adrenaline. "Help me," he gasped, grabbing my pant leg. "Please. I can feel it inside me, changing me." I don't know how," I admitted, kneeling beside him. "Kill me," he begged, his eyes wild with fear. "Before I become one of them. Please." "I can't," I whispered, tears in my eyes. "I'm sorry." His eyes locked with mine, suddenly fierce despite his pain. "Then run. Get out while you still can. Tell the world what happened here." Suddenly the overhead lights died completely. Total darkness fell, thick as tar. All that was left were faint glows, patches of what looked like luminescent moss on the walls, or the baboon's flicker in the distance, or the occasional gleam of serpent eyes. I almost fell on broken floor tiles. I tried to remember where the gate was, if I could just make it there. But how? The place was impossible to navigate in the dark. A voice hissed behind me. "Not Smith." I froze. It sounded like my grandmother's voice mixed with a hyena's laugh. Or maybe it was a bird mimicking. I was losing track of what was real and what wasn't. "Grandmother?" I whispered, unable to help myself. "Such a disappointment," the voice continued, changing, becoming less human. "I had such hopes for you." "You're not her," I said firmly, clenching my fists. "You're just another trick of this place." "Am I?" The voice changed again, sounding exactly like my grandmother now. "Or am I what's left of her after Collins was done? Parts of us all end up in his collection, Nathan. Memories, fears, hopes." I heard footsteps to my left. I turned and saw the dim outline of a caretaker with scales on his face, reflecting the weak emergency lights. He hissed, "Help! Me!" Then he lunged, jaws snapping like he was starving. I dodged, heart racing, my shoe slipping on the wet floor. No safe path. Everything was pushing me deeper into the preserve. I spotted a sign, "Emergency exit," scrawled in faded paint. Desperate, I followed it. The sign led me into a corridor I didn't recognize. one lined with large glass panels like the avian gallery, but darker, the glass almost black. I could see shapes moving behind them, strange forms that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, a face appeared at the glass, pressing from inside. Human, but twisted, mouth open in a silent scream. I almost dropped my crowbar. Another caretaker? Another victim? The figure melted back into the blackness like it had never been there. Shuddering, I kept going, trying to ignore my pounding heart. Down one final corridor, I saw an eerie open space where staff had once displayed something behind a huge wall of plate glass. The glass was now cracked from the meltdown, spiderwebs spreading across its surface. On the other side, I saw a swirling shape. A caretaker or creature merged with the reflection. I heard it whisper, "Nate, come closer." The voice bubbled, distorted, like someone talking underwater. I recognized the caretaker uniform. The face was half embedded in the glass, mouth pressed outward in a silent cry. Another victim who broke a rule with the avian gallery, maybe. "Who are you?" I called out cautiously. "James Miller," the face in the glass replied, voice rippling like disturbed water. I broke Rule 3. The avian gallery's windows must stay open, but only under the new moon. Close them 10 minutes early. "Can I help you?" I asked, though I doubted there was anything I could do. "Too late for me," James said, his words slurring as if the glass was eating his ability to speak. "But not for you. Find the file, in Collins's office, about your grandmother." My heart skipped. What about my grandmother? "She found a way to reverse the transformations," he said, his voice getting fainter as more of his face sank into the glass. "That's why Collins wanted her. Why he wants you." They seemed stuck between worlds, half glass, half flesh. I swallowed a horrified sob. Then the glass started to crack more, like it couldn't hold that half-living thing. I backed up, my shoes crunching on bits of broken glass. "Run," James urged, his mouth barely able to form words now. "Before he finds you. Before you become part of his collection." Behind me, more footsteps approached. Possibly Miss Owens or another guard. No time. With a final burst of desperation, I skirted the exhibit, forced open a side door that led into an alley behind the building. As I fled, I heard the caretaker's voice, warped beyond human, call out, "Don't! Leave! Me!" But the cracking glass hissed dangerously, shards falling. I couldn't do anything for him. I forced myself to keep going, guilt eating at me the whole way. Outside, the air was thick with smoke from small fires. Animal cries and caretaker screams echoed under the moonless sky. Stumbling forward, I made my way down the twisted paths, gravel crunching under my feet. Then I saw it. The main gate, battered and half open. A group of staff huddled there, not even looking at me. They were staring at something overhead, a swirling black shape near the tower. Possibly Mr. Collins unleashing some final measure. Holding my bleeding side, I didn't even remember getting cut. I inched toward freedom. The staff parted, some in shock, some yelling about, "He's lost control." "What's happening?" I asked one of them, a young woman whose name tag read, Rachel. She turned to me, her eyes wide with terror. "Collins, something's wrong with him. The collection is rebelling." "Rebelling?" "The creatures," she whispered. "All of them. At once. It's like they're following some new leader." I glanced up. The tower window was shattered. A shape hovered there, human or demon, I couldn't tell. A monstrous screech rippled across the preserve. Could that be Mr. Collins himself, undone by his own creatures? Mira, I realized suddenly. She's turned the creatures against him. Rachel grabbed my arm. "You know about this? Are you involved?" I shook her off. "I'm just trying to survive like everyone else." The staff turned to see me passing. Lucia recognized me, but her face just showed numb horror. She let me go without a word. I slipped through the gates. The moment I crossed the threshold, a weird feeling washed over my skin, like walking through a static field. I stumbled onto the road, gasping, half expecting something to yank me back by the collar. But nothing came. Behind me, the keeper's shrieks continued, drowned out by animal roars. A crash of metal, splintering wood. The meltdown was in full swing, and I was no longer part of it. I stumbled onto the road, the preserve behind me, the night air cold in my lungs. My chest burned, bruises throbbed, but I was alive. For how long? The rules said once you left you might still be hunted, but for now, I was out. I collapsed on the asphalt, staring at the silent horizon. Far away, I heard one final chime from the tower, then a roar that made my blood run cold. Gathering what strength I had left, I forced myself to my beat-up car. The keys were still in my pocket. Somehow, I hadn't lost them in the chaos. The engine coughed to life. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I drove until the preserve was just a speck in my rearview mirror. But even then, I felt it trailing me, like an invisible cord connecting us. It's been a few days now, and I'm holed up in this shitty motel, far from the Collins Preserve. The news talks about a mysterious fire at the private zoo, rumored casualties, a possible chemical leak. They clean it up, call it an accident. Of course they do. My reflection in the mirror sometimes looks wrong. I swear I see faint serpent scales on my fingertip, or my smile stretching too wide. Once I'm pretty sure my eyes glowed in the dark. Nightmares chase me every time I close my eyes. I hear the hyenas, the birds calling my name, the lantern baboon crunching bones. I think about the bird lady I tried to save. She got tranked. Did she make it? I don't know. The meltdown might have killed her or changed her even more. I remember the feathers growing from her skin, how human her eyes still looked. I think about the ND corridor. Those half-changed caretakers. Did they escape in the chaos, or are they still trapped under rubble, crying in the dark? I wonder if Mr. Collins died when his preserve collapsed, or if he became something even worse. I might never know. All I know is that I can't pretend this place never existed. So I'm writing this down, every horrible detail. Because somewhere, the survivors of that meltdown might regroup. The monsters might escape or pop up somewhere else. If you ever see a job listing for night zookeeper at some weird wildlife preserve, run the other way. The last time I slept, I heard a faint chime in the distance like a silver bell calling me back. Will I resist it? For now, yeah. But I'm afraid it's only a matter of time before that bell finds me again. I keep a tranq gun by my bed. My finger sometimes gets this scaly, dry feeling. I'm a coward, I guess. I left everyone in that meltdown. But maybe, just maybe, I also helped free a few souls from the ND corridor. Some might be out there, half changed but alive. If you see them, or if you see anything with glowing patches of skin or eyes that laugh with human voices, run. Or do what my grandmother would have done. Help them. But be warned, it might cost you everything. In the end, we're all trapped somewhere. By guilt, by horrible secrets, by nightmares that eat away at us. Maybe we all have a monster inside us. Maybe those rules weren't just for the creatures, but for us too. So that's my story. I'm Nathan Smith, former caretaker at Collins's Preserve, ex-vet student, coward, accidental hero. If you read this and feel tempted to check out that place, don't. Unless you've got a death wish or you're into fates worse than death. And if you do go, at least follow the rules. That's the end of this story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.